I mean, when you really think about so many different elements of Iran as a country, right? I think Trump doesn't understand Iranian culture. So when he issues these insane threats of like wiping out their civilization or bombing their civilian infrastructure, that only hardens the Iranians. That doesn't scare them at all.
In today's video, Anna Kasparian destroys Piers Morgan's MAGA panel on Piers Morgan Uncensored. When you look at what's happening, it's not just politics as usual. You've got escalating rhetoric, shifting policies, and no clear long-term strategy. And that's exactly what makes situations like this dangerous. Even institutions like the International Monetary Fund have warned that geopolitical instability like this can ripple across the global economy almost immediately. But before we dive into today's video, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one.
The sort of day-to-day craziness of the Trump Truth Social posts where he's threatening to wipe out a civilization one day and then threatening to destroy all the power plants, which, by the way, would be a war crime in another post, and then saying everything's great. And the market manipulations. I mean, you're quoting poly market. I mean, the corruption in the poly market, not to mention the futures market, is unprecedented. And in that kind of a crazy situation, a delicate, agreement with the Iranians over serious issues that require a lot of nuance and a lot of hard negotiating, basically impossible, both because of the chaos on their side, which is real, and the chaos on the U.S. side, which is real and obvious. So that's a really bad situation. In any country you go to, any diplomat you talk to in any part of the world will tell you the same thing, that the entire world is suffering because of the craziness of the Trump team and the intransigence of the Iranians. It's not that one is blamed or the other is blamed. They both have a responsibility for getting into this mess, and nobody has a plan for getting out. So I think this is going to be, at best, a medium boil conflict for the foreseeable future, well into the summer, and at worst, to return to major combat operations that will cost American and Iranian lives especially.
May I buttress his point? Because I do want to add something to what he said. And I agree entirely with your analysis here. There's a story out today in the Financial Times, the FT, where they go in depth into the 34 Iranian vessels. It's part of their so-called shadow fleet that were able to circumvent the U.S. blockade on Iranian vessels. And as an American, of course, you're supposed to be on American side and you're supposed to be rooting for what America is doing. But it's incredibly hard to do that when you see how much of an economic struggle this is imposing on countries all around the world. In the very beginning of this war, Trump actually lifted sanctions on Iranian oil because he wanted to ensure that the supply of oil wasn't going to be as limited as predicted. And then when he saw that they were unwilling to play ball with the Strait of Hormuz, Trump decided to kind of have a bit of a tantrum and engage in this U.S. blockade of the Iranian vessels. But Iran is able to circumvent, I guess, to some extent. And that is a good thing because we do need more supply on the global market in order to try to keep, gas prices down to some extent. But Lufthansa, one of these major European airline companies, just announced that they have just completely canceled tens of thousands of flights in order to reserve fuel. They're running out of jet fuel. So the longer this goes on, the worse this is going to be.
Now, when you look at conflicts like this, it's not just about the US and Iran going back and forth. The entire global system gets dragged into it. For example, around 20% of the world's oil supply moves through the Strait of Hormuz. So even small disruptions there can spike energy prices worldwide. That's why even the threat of instability in that region can send markets into panic mode. And that ties directly into what they're getting at: uncertainty. Financial markets hate unpredictability. Institutions like the International Monetary Fund have repeatedly warned that geopolitical instability is one of the biggest risks to global growth. So when policy looks inconsistent, like shifting from easing pressure to aggressive blockades, it doesn't just affect diplomacy, it hits economies everywhere. Anna's point about the shadow fleet is also real. Sanctioned countries like Iran and Russia have increasingly relied on informal shipping networks to bypass restrictions. Reports have shown these fleets can involve hundreds of vessels operating outside normal regulations, which makes enforcement way harder than it sounds on paper. And then there's the aviation side she mentioned. That's another underrated impact. Airlines are extremely sensitive to fuel costs. When oil prices spike or supply tightens, companies start cutting routes or raising prices fast. That's not theoretical. Organizations like the International Air Transport Association have warned that fuel shortages and price volatility can directly reduce flight capacity and drive up travel costs. So yeah, both of them are tapping into the same core issue. This isn't just a regional conflict anymore. It's a global chain reaction. When there's no clear strategy and everything feels reactive instead of planned, it creates a situation where nobody really wins, and everyone ends up paying for it in some way.
We haven't mentioned Israel yet. And there's still this ongoing debate, which Trump furiously denied a few days ago, that he was railroaded into this by the Israelis. But clearly, from what Marco Rubio said very early on, America got involved because the Israelis presented a plan which could involve the immediate taking out of the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, and a lot of top people. But then they laid out a plan, according to the New York Times, that would then follow that, where you'd have the collapse of the IRGC, the people would rise up, there would be a regime change in the realist terms, and the Strait of Hormuz would be an irrelevance. Everyone would be too busy to notice it. None of the rest of that plan has materialized. What do we feel about the Israeli part of this? Because we haven't discussed it. And the Israelis, I don't think they really care whether there's chaos in Iran, but I do think the Americans care.
You're right in that assessment. And, as much as I trust the gentlemen on the panel when they say that they're concerned about nuclear material that's in the possession of the Iranians, the fact of the matter is this war, for the Israelis at least, was never really about their so-called fear of Iran's nuclear material or nuclear weapons, because Israel itself is a nuclear power and, in fact, have threatened to use their nukes on multiple occasions. The traitor to the United States, Jonathan Pollard, has suggested it on 2 different occasions that Israel should use its nuclear weapons. But what Israel wants more than anything is a similar situation to that of Syria, where there is chaos. It's a complete and utter disaster in Syria, but they're no longer worried about Bashar al-Assad and his alliance with the Iranians. Now they want to get rid of the Iranian regime, but that has proven to be a lot more difficult. And in fact, there really are no signs that that is going to happen. I mean, when you really think about so many different elements of Iran as a country, right? I think Trump doesn't understand Iranian culture. So when he issues these insane threats of like wiping out their civilization or bombing their civilian infrastructure, that only hardens the Iranians. That doesn't scare them at all. And he should learn that lesson by now, because he's like broadcasting that he intends to do these, war crimes, and he's getting nothing from that other than people giving him the side eye or condemning him pretty aggressively. What Israel wants is to be able to do what they're doing right now in Lebanon. They want to expand their borders, what they've already done in Syria, expand their borders without any challenge from Iran or its proxy groups, which is why it's important for the Trump administration to understand, as much as they think that this is about nuclear material or even ballistic missiles, for the Israelis, it's not. That was always the cover story. They want regime change or they want a failed state.
If you zoom out a bit, the idea of regime change isn't new at all. The US tried versions of it in places like the Iraq War and Libya, and in both cases, removing leadership didn't create stability, it created long-term power vacuums. Libya, for example, went from a centralized government to years of factional fighting, and even today it's still dealing with divided control. That's why analysts are always skeptical when they hear talk of quick collapse scenarios. History just doesn't back that up. There's also the Iran-specific factor she hints at, national identity. Iran isn't just a government, it's a country with a strong sense of history and resistance to outside pressure. Studies in international relations have shown that external threats often strengthen internal unity rather than weaken it. So when rhetoric gets extreme, like threats against infrastructure or leadership, it can actually rally public support around the government instead of undermining it. And on the the Israel side, there's a broader strategic context too. Countries often prioritize reducing threats in their immediate region, and Iran's network of alliances, groups like Hezbollah, has been a long-standing concern. But trying to reshape that entire system through force is incredibly complex. Even experts from groups like the International Crisis Group have warned that escalating pressure without a clear endgame usually leads to prolonged instability, not clean outcomes. That's why Anna's point lands. This isn't a simple one-objective conflict. You've got overlapping goals, different players with different priorities, and no clear plan for what comes after. And when that's the case, things don't resolve cleanly. They drag out. And historically, when conflicts drag out like that, it's not just the region that pays for it. It's everyone watching from the outside too.
Clay Travis, how do you see this playing out? What's your best bet of what we're going to witness?
I think we seize the nuclear dust, and as sort of a wink, wink, nod, nod behind the scene agreement, we unfreeze the Iranian assets as a part of doing that. Iran has to open back up its economy. The Strait of Hormuz opens back up. I think that all happens within the next month. And so I am somewhat optimistic that rational actors here will end up reaching a rational conclusion, even if Iran doesn't acknowledge agreeing to it publicly, and even if the United States doesn't acknowledge agreeing to it publicly either. What Iran wants is unfrozen assets and the ability to sell product. What we want is the nuclear dust and an open Strait of Hormuz. I think that's where we're going to end up.
Okay, Anna, finally you. What would you say?
Let me just say, I've been vibing with Josh for sure. Josh seems to know what's going on, and I agree wholeheartedly. The one thing I'll just add is this whole notion of going in and getting the nuclear dust, as Trump likes to call it. This is something that Benjamin Netanyahu has been fear-mongering about for literally decades, dating back to the 1980s. So I think the IDF should go in and get the nuclear dust. I think that's their job. I don't think we should risk the lives of our American soldiers in doing that operation.
The idea that this all wraps up neatly with some behind-the-scenes deal sounds good, but historically that's just not how these situations play out. Take the Iran nuclear deal, JCPOA, for example. That was a heavily negotiated multi-country agreement that took years to build, with strict inspections from the International Atomic Energy Agency. And even with all that structure, it still fell apart once political leadership changed. That alone shows how fragile these quiet deals really are. There's also the military side people gloss over. Securing nuclear material inside a country like Iran isn't some quick operation. Experts have pointed out that Iran's nuclear infrastructure is spread across multiple hardened and underground sites. That means any attempt to physically seize or destroy it would be complex, risky, and almost guaranteed to escalate tensions rather than quietly resolve them. And Anna's point about who should actually be involved matters more than people think. The US has spent decades dealing with the consequences of getting pulled into long conflicts in the Middle East, from the Iraq War to Afghanistan, and one of the biggest lessons from those is that even limited objectives can spiral into long-term commitments. There's also the economic angle. Even small disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz can spike global oil prices, which immediately hits everyday people through gas and inflation. So this isn't just a strategic issue, it's something that affects the global economy almost instantly. That's why the more cautious approach makes sense here. It's not about being weak or indecisive. It's about recognizing that these situations don't resolve cleanly, and rushing into them usually creates bigger problems than the ones you started with. And history has shown that over and over again.